Hi everybody, Sarah here. Checking in. I've been doing pretty good so far. Just focusing on classes is pretty much all I've been doing. I'm also focusing on graduating. So I'm trying to make a bunch of cards for all the people who I'm going to invite. So that's been fun. Other than that, everything's been doing good. In a probably an hour or two, I'm gonna be heading over to Albuquerque again this weekend to visit my dad. So that's going to be fun. We're trying to see if we can check out the house that we're trying to rent out. So wish us luck, guys. Anyways, for our work today, the composer I chose was Steve Reich. And some of the things that we learned about him, he's considered one of the first masters of repetitive music. So I think that's interesting. Coming from New York in the 60s is where he had his music first branded as minimalism. Over time, he would broaden his and develop his musical techniques, but he wouldn't really compromise any of like the precision in his technique. So it's pretty much evolving in the good way, where, or I guess you could say in a good way with his style. Um, let's see. His characteristics in his music are described as repetitive, pulse-driven figures that remained a characteristic in his work, but there are some slips and leaps of a lively mind. Um, in his early life, after his parents got divorced as a child, divided between New York and California, one of his pieces that he would make in the 80s would be about, or would be inspired by the long railroad journeys that he would have as a child. That piece is called Different Trains. But he would begin to actually study drumming with a man named Roland Koloff at age 14. He would go to school for a very long time, and he was always interested in learning more about music and different techniques. Went to Cornell from 1953 to 57. His main study was actually philosophy, but he would attend a man named William W. Austin's music courses. It was when he would go back, he would get like a lot of like inspiration from these works. So when he went back to New York, he went back to study composition, first privately with Hall Overton, 1957 to 58. Then Juilliard with a man named William Bergsma and Vincent Persiceti from 1958 to 61. Then he still went to school, went to Mills College in California to study his master's in composition with Luciano Berio from 1961 to 63. But beginning in his career, it would be in San Francisco that he would make his first discovery that would lead him to his first acknowledged piece, which is called "It's Gonna Rain" in 1965. This style would take it to kind of what we would hear in later pieces. It would be basically two machines playing these identical loops of a recorded speech that would slowly go up more out of sync with each other. And we've seen a lot of works like these over the years, so or especially here with this week's topic. So that's interesting. So they all kind of follow probably a similar pattern. Let's see. Then he would when he would go on tours, he created a some pieces that could be rehearsed in a hotel room, clapping music for two pairs of hands, 1972. His main swerve, though, was to go towards larger and richer assemblies, with his works like six pianos and music for mallet instruments, voices, and organ, which was both made in 1973. They would also follow a similar pattern, repetitions of a repeating figure that would duplicate beat by beat, out of phase with the repetitions more and more. Um, it was for one of the pieces that I'm going to talk about here. Or one of the pieces that we're going to talk about for this guy is made for music for 18 musicians. But it was after that is where he would make slightly large or yeah, slightly larger assembles compared to one of his previous pieces. We talked about music for melon instruments, and it was here where he would find plenty of opportunities for commissions that would become irresistible deals. He would write new pieces, 8 lines for Radio Frankfurt, and was given the chance to even compose for bigger forces in music for a large ensemble for the Holland Festival, and variations for wind, strings, and keyboards for San Francisco. Um, his music consisted of a lot of layering tempos, repetitive but changing figures, and independent handling of melodies and harmonies. But he would soon add additions that were sorry that he would soon add additions that would be added to these kinds of works and styles. And we saw this with a previous composer, although I can't remember if it was one. I think it was one that I talked about last week, where he would use the gamelan and learn Balinese music to where that would these Eastern styles would differentiate with his work. Um, Steve also did the same thing, where whenever he would want to learn something new, he would go just straight for it, and this was no exception. He would be working with a lot of Ghanaian and Balinese musicians, which would cause him to think about the traditions that he belonged to, and that would take some inspiration from his for later works. He would go to Israel to hear singers from different Eastern Sephardi communities, and those styles would be incorporated into his music. For one of the pieces that I wanted to talk about today is music for 18 musicians, section one. It would start off with a fast-paced, high-octave piano playing. There are lots of conjunctions on how close those notes are together throughout the piece. Um, and then over time, a slower melody playing slightly lower octaves would sound to play. It sounded like a xylophone, although I'm not really entirely sure what it was. This one had more disjunction and contrast to the fast-paced rhythm with its calmness. And so throughout this piece, of course, it's like layers and layers are adding up to the point where you don't hear previous layers taken out. Like the piano at the beginning, like in the middle section, it just sounds like it's just gone. So it's very good at keeping you focused on what there is now and doesn't like distract you from what's pretty much taken out. In the 25 seconds, more instruments would play. And this is around the time where it would start to become more difficult and more layers to hearing what was actually playing. It was harder to separate them. I had to go back and replay it with my eyes closed because just having them open was honestly beginning to give me like some sort of sensory issue. It's a lot. But after that, you kind of know what to expect already, so it becomes easier and easier to hear. But there's definitely a lot of polyphony in this piece, of course, with a lot of these musicians. Definitely everything is meant to sound like different and stand out to where it gets into that blurred kind of mess in a way. Um, there would also be more wind instruments, some violins, something that sounded like a bell. Um, Compared, the wind and violin instruments were definitely interesting. The violin wouldn't play as much, but you could definitely hear it, and it would play like these like much more lower octave, like longer notes compared to the wind instruments that ends up taking up most of the piece at the end, playing lots of fast-paced, conjuncted notes, higher tempo, higher octave as well. Um, and yeah, over time, the newer, there what was previously the higher octaves would end up, like I said, getting replaced by these newer, louder wind instruments and bells playing at faster tempos. So it's not, so you won't hear those previous ones be taken out, which I think is interesting. This piece greatly reminded me of something that you would hear in like an early 2000s or 90s like children learning show or like baby sensory video. It's a lot of like this childlike whimsy in this piece that makes you feel both like, oh, it's excited because it's both fast paced or it's fast paced, but it's also tranquil at the same time, giving you a sort of nostalgia for it. At the end of this piece, the wind instruments go into a lower and lower octave until less and less instruments begin to play to where it's only the xylophone sounding instrument at the end playing at the fast tempo. Um, I really liked learning about this composer. I would have to go and do some of, well, also looking at the Oxford, I have to go look into my own kind of research on him just to kind of see what he was like, since the Oxford Dictionary was really mainly only about his work itself. But I thought it was really interesting and I really actually liked his music. It definitely reminded of people that we have been hearing for this section of the class. And like I said, the last time that we talked about a composer report, his work greatly reminded me of his. And yeah, I really thought that this was really interesting and it was really cool to learn all about this guy. So I'll put a link like I usually do. Hopefully you guys see those links on what the song sounds like. This is one that I would definitely recommend listening to. But yeah, other than that, I'm gonna go start packing because I haven't done that yet. So I'll see you guys next composer report. So bye everybody.